Like 100 miles? Really? 200 miles?
I don't know exactly, man. I mean, you know, all that shit's classified. I was a cook back then. You think you're coming down to the best decks and telling the cook what the hell's happening?
You would believe it's clear.
So they just go out and wait till it passes and then do it.
We didn't come back in, not us, because we were heading on to the 7th Fleet. We were going to Guam after July. They just re-navigated us to get to Guam instead of going the normal route. We went out of the way, be out of the way of hurricanes, out of the
hurricanes. Now is this because it's dialing counterclockwise? That's why it's not a cyclone or a
typhoon.
Yeah, he's got to do the other side of the date line for it to be typhoon.
You get the Philippines, it's a typhoon.
Even though it's going counterclockwise?
It's still a hurricane because it's in the northern Pacific. It's east.
But if it's rotating clockwise, then is it a
Well, you got cyclone, you got cyclone and anticyclone.
A cyclone and an anticyclone.
Yeah, I knew once we crossed the date line, they called them typhoons. You know, the date line was kind of like right after Guam, you know, so Hawaii's in our part of the date line. We're in the same date.
Oh, I got you.
Hawaii is. Yeah, we cross that date line, they're a day ahead.
In that part of the Pacific, it's called typhoon.
Well, what's a cyclone?
Hello, sir.
A typhoon,
How you doing?
hurricane, is a cyclone?
Where are you from?
Honolulu.
Are you traveling along?
Oh, I travel along over the weekend. I did DC course.
Okay, great. I'm Michael Hart. I work the news staff.
Oh, well done.
Yes, I do that. Did you RSVP too?
Okay.
If you could, just so we have a record.
Oh, yeah, sure.
FEMA dash, or you chat. That's good direction. It is. Yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay. It's FEMA dash. If this is the email.
It's a little buzzy down there.
Yes. Thank you so much. We're all here.
Yeah, the Navy crossed the date line, they said you go over Iraq, crossing on a boat.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. How much is it?
Cleaning up my phone.
How we do these here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
My fault. Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Remember that Market Inn used to be around here? Restaurant and bar. Remember that
Yeah.
place? It was down by NASA. We used to have brunch on Sundays, jazz brunch. Remember that? Yeah, well, you did that. You put it out there, man.
No, touch that.
You're just young, man, that's
Is that
all.
the place that used to down here that
You ain't young no more though, are you? I ain't want nothing, man. You know something? I'm gonna get that too. But all the HR people are down, Bobby, you jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. And I said, you know what? Let me dig this fire for a while, because it's cold out here in the frying pan. Y'all didn't put no grease in it, you didn't put no fire underneath it, you know? This job used to be, you know.
When's the last time you shot a picture still?
When they opened up the MLK Memorial, Holt came down there, and that had to be, what, 8 years ago, something like that, 9 years ago, a long time back. But I mean, the one I shot all the way through, and all the use of my footage was stopped. Yeah, we don't ever shoot. Jim Long might get one every now and then, but all we shoot is albums, you know, at the network station. Well, it's a network, you know, I mean, the only guys to do that are guys who work on the magazine shows. Or do, yeah, he's going up to New York.
When's his last? Hey, where's your cover?
Friday, 17th.
Yeah, Martine's son works with us, man.
Yeah, I heard he bought a house.
Yeah. He's Tony Butler, both those guys are college baseball players, so their softball team, I said, dude, just stay right here. As long as they play softball at ABC, you can have a job. Because they like having you ring.
Tony Butler, didn't he play football in college?
Played football and baseball.
Is he D1?
Yeah. He was down at Richmond.
Hey everyone, thanks for being patient with us today. I do have some updates on who is joining us today, so I'll just ask that you pass those around. I'll run through it really quick for everybody. So we will be on the record today, obviously. We will start with some opening remarks and a weather update, and we'll run through some operational updates for everybody, and then at the end we'll have time for some Q&A. For the cameras, I ask that you keep in mind we'll have an ASL interpreter here, so if you can keep your frames adjusted for that. We will have FEMA Administrator Brock Long, Associate Administrator for Response and Recovery, Jeff Byer, FEMA NOAA Liaison, Steve Goldstein will provide the weather update. U.S. Coast Guard Deputy Commandant for Operations, Policy and Capabilities, Rear Admiral Meredith Austin. U.S. Department of Defense Deputy Assistant Secretary of Civil Authorities, Robert Salises. Apologize. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, this is not on your list. Major General Scott Spellman, that's Spellmon. And American Red Cross Vice President for Disaster Operations and Logistics, Brad Kaiserman. And we'll get started momentarily. Thank you again.
So Martine's last day is,
I heard Friday.
and you guys have 6 openings or 8? Since he's
No, I don't exactly know. Something, I don't know. I mean, I'll believe it when I see 6 people show up. You know what I mean? And it took, I know it took, I think almost a year to fill 2 positions before. So I don't know. Yeah.
You know, squeeze on by. Yeah, come on through. Come on through. All right, folks, we ready to go? Okay. Obviously, Hurricane Lane is a very dangerous storm that is encroaching on the state of Hawaii. There's a lot of uncertainty with this forecast. I've watched a lot of forecasts in my life, and the thing about it is that anytime you see a 90-degree turn to the west over the next 48 to 72 hours, there's a lot of uncertainty. What is for sure, though, is that Hawaii is going to be impacted by Hurricane Lane. The question is how bad. Right now, this system is really setting up to be a significant rain event, torrential rains. Forecasters are predicting over 30 inches in some parts. You could see higher amounts isolated. And we're extremely concerned about the potentials for inland flooding, landslides occurring, and damage to the transportation communications infrastructure. And we are taking all the precautions that we can here at FEMA to help our state and local partners in Hawaii pre-position and ready to support all life safety and life-sustaining actions that may be needed as the storm approaches. The other issue that we're going to see is that this is not just going to be over in the next 24 hours. This system is going to be with us for the next 4 or 5 days, continuing to bring winds to the island, to bring large surf, as well as the torrential rains that we've talked about. So what are we focused on? Again, life safety. Obviously, right now we're asking citizens to please heed all warnings that local and state officials have been pushing out. It's incredibly important that you do this now, as we're already seeing large rainfall amounts occurring on the Big Island, in Hawaii County. I think some of the estimates have been anywhere between 10 and 12 inches already, and that's just going to continue. So the preparations need to be made by citizens in Hawaii. Again, heed all warnings, local warnings that are put out by them. In a minute, we'll go to our Red Cross, our partners at Red Cross here to talk about the sheltering. But FEMA, has been hyper-focused on making sure that we're properly set up to support food, water, as well when it comes to commodities. Unfortunately, Hawaii has been through it here most recently with not only the active volcano, but we also saw a flood disaster in April. And then with the threat that Hurricane Hector provided well over a week ago, we not only have a solid force staff laydown within the state that's been actively supporting the governor as well as the local governments, but we continue to, we were pushing commodities for hurricane in anticipation of Hurricane Hector, and we continue to support commodities into the island. But what's different and what we learned from 2017 that's already being incorporated in real time for this event is that, most importantly, we've got strong communication with our private sector partners. We've been working with the major grocer wholesalers that are there that support the island. And the main goal is to make sure that they can continue to provide services regardless of the hit. And if things shut down, then they use, we've got our emergency commodities ready to go. Great communication with Governor Ige. Spoke with him late last night. He had requested an emergency declaration that the president swiftly approved and pushed forward on, showing our full force and support to the governor, and we will continue to work forward. Today, we have several partners here. Again, emergency management, proper disaster response and recovery is all about unity of effort and partnership. It's not just one agency that's responsible for everything. And the bottom line is that we rely not only on our federal government partners, but we rely on great communication and coordination down through all the way down to the citizen. So the bottom line is I want to push this over right now to some of our other partners, and specifically with the National Weather Service, Steve Goldstein from the National Weather Service, to give us an update.
Okay, the latest advisory, Hurricane Lane was still a Category 4 hurricane with maximum winds of 130 miles per hour. It was located 210 miles south of Kona, Hawaii, and 305 miles south of Honolulu, Hawaii. It is expected to turn more northerly and take more of a north to northwest track over the next 24 to 36 hours, after which it will take a west turn and move out into sea. In doing this, it will pass very close to the Hawaiian Islands and is expected to have major impact. You do not need a direct strike to have major impacts from a hurricane this strong. There'll be a lot of moisture over the Hawaiian Islands for the next several days. 10 to 20 inches of rainfall is forecast, and over 30 inches of rain is possible, especially in the steep terrain and the mountains. This will likely flood roadways, possibly wash out bridges, and cause evacuations and necessitate water rescues. Rivers and tributaries could overflow their banks. Mudslides, rock slides, and debris flows will be possible in the mountainous steep terrain. In addition to this, tropical storm force winds are expected to overspread the Hawaiian Islands throughout the day today, possibly reaching hurricane force late tonight into tomorrow, depending upon the exact track of the storm. Dangerous surf and swell, 10 to 20 feet, expected along south and west facing beaches. And the storm surge, especially around the time of high tide, which is significant because we are in a full moon, will be 2 to 4 feet above the normal tide levels, and that could cause additional problems. That will conclude my portion of the weather briefing.
Thank you, Steve. Next, I'm going to turn it over to our partners at the U.S. Coast Guard. We have Rear Admiral Meredith Austin with us today. Obviously, one of the greatest concerns that we have is how the ports and the waterways are going to be impacted within the state, but also the Coast Guard provides tremendous capability when it comes to search and rescue. So in addition to the Coast Guard assets, and I'm going to turn it over here to the Rear Admiral here in a second, we've also deployed urban search and rescue teams to the island, to all 4 counties, to be ready to support any swift water rescues that may occur as a result of this system. So, ma'am.
Good afternoon. The safety of the people in Hawaii, as well as our Coast Guard members and their families, are the priority right now. We're working closely with our partners in FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, other federal, state, and local agencies in preparing for the impacts of the storm. Our operational commanders in our Pacific area of operations have pre-position our assets, our aircraft, our boats, our people, to be ready to hunker down and then pass by behind the storm to be able to respond as soon as it's safe to do so. And we urge the people that are in Hawaii right now to heed all the warnings, stay off the beach right now, stay out of the water, and evacuate if told to do so. Thank you.
All right, next, again, the Department of Defense provides tremendous support to the National Response Framework and our ability to properly respond and recover. And today we have Bob Salasese today with us, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Civil Authorities. So thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Brock. The leadership of the department, as you can imagine, is very focused on this. In particular, Secretary Mattis and Admiral Davidson, who's the commander of Indo-PACOM. They've been monitoring the storm very closely. They're also taking necessary action now to protect the safety and well-being of our military community. They're also working to ensure the readiness of our U.S. military in the region. They're also posturing capability, military capability, to provide immediate support for life-saving and life-sustaining capability. The department has significant military capability in Hawaii. We have over 57,000 military members that reside in Hawaii. The department works very closely with Administrator Long and the FEMA team on a regular basis. We're well connected and communicating daily. Our military in Hawaii will be ready to provide search and rescue, rotary wing support, damage assessment, and transportation and logistics and medical support. Along with our military, we have U.S. Transcom, which will provide strategic and maritime lift. We have the Defense Logistics Agency, which has tremendous logistics capability to provide meals, fuel, and those types of things. And then, of course, we have the Corps of Engineers, which will provide emergency power, and you'll hear from them in a second. Our National Guard is well prepared in Hawaii, working with the Governor Ige too, and the department looks forward to working very closely again with Administrator Long. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to turn it over to our partners over at the American Red Cross, Brad Kaiserman, who's the Vice President for Disaster Operations for the American Red Cross, very good partner of ours. Obviously, there's a lot of questions about sheltering, so I want, Brad, if you could come in and brief on shelters.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to just reiterate a point that the administrator made. Disaster response is a team sport. And on that team is every level of government, the private sector, the nonprofit community, and the impacted communities themselves. And we all come together to respond and recover from a disaster. It's important to remember that. Everyone's responsible for playing their part. This team has had a lot of experience between floods in Hawaii earlier this year, the Kilauea volcano. The team in Hawaii and the team that supports Hawaii has a lot of experience right now. Shelters in Hawaii are a critical piece. As the storm approaches, the counties in Hawaii are opening evacuation centers. Those evacuation centers are intended for short stays. Their purpose is to allow people to ride out the storm, and then after the storm passes, the folks who can go home do, and the folks who can't are transitioned into emergency shelters, also run by the counties in Hawaii. The American Red Cross supports these shelters by providing shelter staff, shelter supplies, and services like mental health services, healthcare services, reunification, spiritual care, just to name a few. There are many volunteer organizations responsible and involved in disaster response. I want to highlight the work of the Salvation Army in Hawaii with their 18,000 volunteers, kitchens and food supplies and stores that allow them to participate very actively and prominently in disaster feeding. Just one example of partners working together. Last night in Hawaii, there were 16 evacuation centers open with 283 people across the impacted counties. We expect another 19 centers to be open today. Red Cross will be working with the counties to staff all of those centers. Folks who are going to go to those centers are encouraged to bring supplies and bedding supplies, health supplies, again, short-term stay as the storm passes by. We will assess damage with our partners very quickly in the aftermath of the storm, and then working with the counties, we'll support the opening of emergency shelters that have those wraparound services based on where the damage is and where people have needs. And I'll just conclude with this. Somebody once told me it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And so what that means is readiness is important. Readiness to make sure that we can fulfill our responsibilities under the critical infrastructure lifelines the administrator mentioned is critically important. And the state of Hawaii, the counties in Hawaii, and all of their partners have been planning for this type of event now for years. This would be the first landfall in a long, long time. If it happens as a landfall, whether it makes landfall or not, it is a dangerous event, and we are ready for it. Sir, thank you, sir.
right.
Yes, sir.
Next, we're all concerned about the impact to the power grid there in Hawaii. We learned a lot in 2017, obviously. So part of it when we concentrate on the critical lifelines and specifically energy, power, and fuel, we've already pushed forward great communication with HECO, which is the power company, the privately owned power company that supports all energy restoration on Hawaii. And we're ready to go with our friends at the Army Corps of Engineers to be able to backfill their support their mutual aid when it comes to getting their mutual aid teams into the islands. That's something that we're ready to go and stand by. Army Corps of Engineers provides amazing support for emergency power as well when it comes to generators. And then we have a focus on, once we see what the impacts are, where we want to put those generators. And typically with an island community, what we learned last year is that it's very important for the generators to be ready to go to support not only our hospitals and medical systems, but also the water systems, so that we can alleviate the need to bring in water via aircraft and ships. We want to be able to turn the water system back on as quickly as we can. So with that, I want to bring up Major General Scott Spellman. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, sir. Thanks, sir. Again, my name is Major General Scott Spellman. I'm the Deputy Commanding General for Civil Works and Emergency Operations at the Army Corps of Engineers. I will tell you that under FEMA and our own internal authorities that we are ready to respond to the impacts of Hurricane Lane to assist the people of Hawaii. We have forward positioned our temporary power, our debris, and our temporary roofing teams, along with their associated contractors, so that we are ready to move forward if and when requested. As Admiral Austin also told you, we remain very, very closely in close contact with the Coast Guard to provide our survey capabilities to assist in port opening activities if and when they are needed. And sir, thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Finally, we're also encouraging all citizens under the guise of being ready and understanding what to do to download the FEMA app. Also, again, if you're looking for shelter information, redcross.org has a wealth of information. Under the FEMA app, you can understand not only how to be ready, but we're also trying to show you where shelter locations are if you're seeking shelter and safe refuge. And with that, also, here again, neighbor helping neighbor is what's needed in time of disaster. That's the most important arm out of all this. And we saw that take place in Hurricane Harvey last year. And that's something that's going to be needed after any disaster, including this one. We would encourage you that if you want to get involved to please visit invoad.org, nvoad.org, to find out how you might be able to get involved and help the great state of Hawaii. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Administrator. My name is Nicola Ross. I'm with Bloomberg Government Court. Wanted to ask you, went into a little bit about what FEMA's done in the last year to prepare that will make it more prepared going into Lane, as far as generators for the island, as far as working with private partners. Could you point to any other specific examples of what we should look for as to how FEMA is better prepared this year to face another island threat versus last year?
Yep, so a lot is we made a lot of changes in real time, in addition to, the high level efforts that we learned through our after action process. Bottom line is we're concentrating on what we call critical lifelines, such as health, safety, and security. We've got food, shelter, health and medical, power and fuel, communications, transportation, hazardous waste. We are hyper-focused on those 7 critical lifelines because we realized last year that if any one of those lifelines goes down, then life safety is in jeopardy. And so we're reorganizing the firepower of the federal government underneath these critical lifelines, and that's what we're pushing forward. So, for example, with communications, what we learned last year was if we don't have the ability to communicate, we've got to get our private sector infrastructure partners that really control our destiny and the ability to communicate in there first, not just food and water going in, but we've got to have our private sector partners in the communication industry going in there simultaneously with us to make sure that not only we can communicate, but that we can also make sure that citizens can communicate with their loved ones as well. And that was one of the biggest pieces that we learned last year. So we're already fixing that one in real time and pushing forward. Next question.
Hi, thanks. Nick Ruby, Honolulu School. You mentioned that there were commodities in place from the flooding on Hawaii and the volcano on the Big Island. Can you provide more specifics as to what those commodities are and how having those in place now are going to help moving forward?
Yeah, so here's how it works. Bottom line is what we learned from last year is that in Puerto Rico, for example, or in the Virgin Islands, many of the grocery store chains actually had preparable food capability that we just didn't tap into, and we should have. And we've learned that lesson, and now what we're doing, one of the first things that we're doing is trying to assess how much food is actually on the island in any given day, and then how do we help the wholesalers and the grocery store chains, where people go to food for normal day, how do we keep them up and running as much as possible? How do we keep the infrastructure up to be able to support them? And so when we go through and do an assessment, we understand that they may have anywhere from 4 to 5 days of food on island at any given time. And then we work with our partners at the Army Corps of Engineers to run impact assessment, and then we back that up through bringing in food, water, and commodities, health hygiene kits for an additional 5 to 7 days on top of that. And then hopefully what happens is after that, if you see the airports and the waterway systems being, if they're busted up and broken, then we concentrate on getting those back up and running. And we have enough, the goal is to have enough food to sustain the island so that we can start to backfill commodities. But more importantly, it's not just providing food and water. I mean, if you fix the power first, you solve 90% of the problems. And going into this one, the story's a little different. The power grid is well maintained. HECO has very robust mutual aid support contracts in place, and the goal is we know exactly how to support them going into this one versus some of the other events that we've had to deal with in the past. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Colleen Long from AP. Can you talk a little bit about the mechanics of getting equipment prepared? Is there are generators and tents and relief aid, is it already on the island, or just sort of practically how does it work when you're on or off the island? And then the other question I had is, I don't know if a needing of a waiver of the Jones Act would be anything that you guys would be responsible for, but I was curious if that, given what happened with Puerto Rico, if there should maybe be some kind of pre-waiver of the Jones Act to get stuff on the island quicker.
So great question. One, the Jones Act doesn't really come into play at this point right here with Hawaii, and I don't foresee it being an issue. When it comes to how emergency management works, it's like that chair you're sitting in. That chair is supported by 4 different legs, right? And the bottom line is if you look at the 4 different legs, the first leg is the local governments and the state governments. The other leg is going to be the private and non-governmental organizations. The third leg is the citizen. The fourth leg is the federal government. When all 4 of those legs have appropriately prepared, written the right plans, mitigated, and come into the response and recovery together, then the disaster response goes really well. We never make the news about it. If any one of those legs is missing going into any one of those phases of emergency management, particularly response and recovery, then it's never going to go as well as people would like, and you're always going to have problems. So I say that in an effort to say that, one, we have to assess the local capabilities for the county emergency management when it comes to what type of generators do they have, what type of swift water rescue teams do they have, what are their capabilities, and then when their capability is exceeded, it goes to the state of Hawaii emergency management, and then as we start to anticipate shortfalls in their capability, that's where federal government support comes in. So the right model for disaster response and recovery is one that is locally executed, state managed, and federally supported, and that's what we're striving for nationwide, and that's what we're pushing forward in all of our strategic planning, going forward. Bigger FEMA, bigger government is, at the federal level in disaster response and recovery, in my opinion, is not the answer. It's collective capability at all levels, and then citizen preparedness, building a true cultural preparedness within our citizenry. Anything else? All right. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that, for example, generators are going to be, held off the shore, ready to go in once the storm is clear.
They're not being held off at shore. They're already on all 4 counties. We have robust generator capability that's there of various sizes, And what happens is that basically we have to see what's impacted. But again, the focus would be health and medical and getting the water system running so that it reduces the dependency on having to bring in bottles of water manually.
Would you also say that this pre-positioning is being held throughout, for example, the other areas that were hit of the U.S. very hard last year, Texas, Florida, Virgin Islands?
Yeah. So here again, when I go back to the example with a chair with all four legs, they were there in Harvey in Texas. The bottom line is you were dealing with a very robust capability at the local and state level, and then again, you know, one of the most beautiful things was neighbor helping neighbor. You had citizens you had the Cajun Navy from Louisiana coming over and helping with swiftwater rescue. That's how it works. That's how it should work, and that's what we're striving for in emergency management. It is. You know, we're all in this together. It is a whole community effort, and what we've got to concentrate on as a nation is what are the core problems and fundamental preparedness within our citizenry, all the way to how is the federal government designed to support state and local capabilities, and that's what we're striving for.
Last question.
I have a question, this is for the Army Corps, actually,
Okay.
about the Ala Wai Canal. My understanding is that the Ala Wai Canal cannot withstand a major flood, and I was wondering, from the Army Corps' perspective, how you guys are viewing the threat from the canal, which I believe over $300 million was recently appropriated to help revamp that.
That's correct. So, as you know, we have both our Honolulu district and our Pacific Ocean Division resident there in Hawaii, and they're keeping a close watch on the canal. We'll continue to monitor its performance throughout the storm, and as you mentioned, a very generous appropriation from Congress for us to go about to modernize and take care of that specific structure in the years ahead.
But I guess how likely is it that the canal will hold up?
Yeah, I would defer. I'd like to talk to our experts in the region, and we can certainly get back with you on a more detailed assessment.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate it. All right.